everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of our ADN podcast. I'm so excited to kick off the new year with a new mini series about DAOs. And so, what better candidate to speak about DAOs than Stefan, who's a co founder at Gnosis? Hi, Stefan.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I think we have with us here somebody who's been around for since the beginning of Ethereum. So we're gonna have a lot to unpack, right? The Gnosis's journey, right, all the way from like ICO and then how it became a DAO and then all the various extensions and ecosystem that has been built around it. But before we go into it, since it's the beginning of the DAO series, I'd like to just touch very quickly on DAOs in general. How do you define them? It's supposed to be originally kind of like purely organizations run on code, but I think today it's kind of already euphemism that it's organizations that are run using token governance, right? Kind of like everything that's non-automated with smart contracts that needs humans, we call it a DAO. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Stefan, on how do you define a DAO, and do you think the term is still relevant today, or how has it evolved?
I think for me, if people ask me what is a DAO, then usually I describe it as kind of a set of rules which are implied through code, but also social norms within a group of how to coordinate an organization and how to come to decision making. And I think this is like on this level, I think it applies to all DAOs that are currently existing. So it's kind of abstract. And of course, like on Ethereum, we are using tokens to show ownership and also to vote on proposals. In terms of the original term, decentralized autonomous organization, I would say this term is very misleading. I think people were thinking of something like Skynet, controlling these organizations and autonomously run them. That's de facto not the case. Obviously, today, all of those DAOs are run by humans. So I think the term is quite misleading. What I'm really excited about with DAOs is that those social norms and the rules which are coded within smart contracts, that we are able to iterate on them very quickly. So if you look at traditional organizations, companies, structures that are existing for a very long time, then it's very difficult to make any change and kind of change how the organization is running. And that's a pity because many organizations are not very good at organizing or not very efficient. And so I think we have a good chance with DAOs to iterate a lot faster and be able to just come up with better designs of how to organize and how to more efficiently run organizations and be more inclusive. And that's, I think, what is really exciting about DAOs.
Right. Yeah, what I hear from you is about a set of code, or rather like it almost sounds like a mission, right? Or a common understanding, a common goal that everybody works towards, and either via code or via human coordination, right? And in a way that's iterative and also with inclusive participation. So as we know, actually, Gnosis has gone through a lot of iteration, but actually didn't start off as a DAO, right? I think Gnosis, I'm not sure whether that was always the intention. I'm sure it was meant to be like an organization, but it started off with an ICO, and I'm not sure whether back then, how different the vision was from today, right? It was a huge ICO back in the day. There was a Dutch auction, and 300 million was raised in a very short period of time because it's supposed to be come down by like people just bought out all of it. And so I'd love to just hear your story, Stefan, about how was Gnosis born, and just walk us through the journey, from there, and how do we get to where Gnosis is today.
Right. Just one small correction. Like, we did not raise 300 million. We raised only 12 million, but at
the German
$300 million valuation.
Yeah.
The journey of Gnosis started, even before Gnosis. Me and my co-founder, we have been building different ideas or projects together in the past, also on Bitcoin, and we also did sort of a prediction market platform using Bitcoin as collateral, and then we saw the potential in Ethereum to do it way more decentralized and started building a decentralized prediction market platform on Ethereum. And then we met Joseph Lubin, who just at that point started Consensus. and he convinced us to do what then was named Gnosis as part of Consensus. But since the very early days, our goal was to do a spin-off, to become independent of Consensus. And we saw Augur kind of pioneering the token sales. I think Augur did the first ICO on Ethereum. And after they succeeded, we decided we also would like to do such a token sale, and prepared everything. And then we started 2015 at Consensus, and then 2017 we were able to do the successful spin-off from Consensus, did the ICO, and and at that time, again, like the term DAO already existed. Obviously, people were talking about DAOs, and I think we also had a vague vision of how Gnosis could eventually become a DAO. But at that time, it was obviously way too early. We hardly had any product. We didn't have any users. And I think we first had the task to find product market fit before we could even think of decentralizing anything. And so for a long time, we did not see the benefit of like really turning Gnosis into a DAO until recently, which probably also has to do with like the bear market, in which anyways it's difficult to find like a good product market fit. And so it took a while, but ultimately we saw a huge benefit in not having this top-down structure where everything is defined by very few people, but rather try to do the opposite, do it bottom up, and let more people take responsibilities. And this is also like a change which happened within the Gnosis organization itself first, before we also moved the structure into a DAO structure. So at the beginning, we it was really mostly top-down management with different projects that we started. And I think about maybe 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago, we already decided to give teams more independence, so they themselves had more ownership. And I think we saw that they were moving much faster and became more successful. And so it kind of led to the thought that yes, we should more broadly also try to hand off ownership and hand off responsibilities, and this will most likely lead to a much faster development of Gnosis.
Right. I'd like to pick on something you mentioned just now about a product market fit, right? So almost sounds like what you're saying is you kind of need to have something that is valuable, then you decentralize it. So in that process of kind of rapid iteration, perhaps it could make more sense to be kind of more centralized as a corporation while you're trying to iterate very quickly. And then once it kind of takes off, then you need to make sure it's resilient by including more people in its kind of improvement as well as governance, right? Is that kind of the approach you would recommend?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think if you, at the beginning, when you're a new project, you have to iterate fast. You will get a lot of feedback, a lot of changes have to be done. And if you have to go through a formal governance process for any of those changes, then this will just hold you back. And it will most likely fail and it will cause a lot of frustration. So yes, I agree. Like it makes sense to first really focus with a small team on solving one problem, making sure that you have product market fit. And once you have product market fit, it will be also become more obvious like what kind of responsibilities you can hand off to more people, because your whole organization will grow. And hopefully you have some community engagement, and then you can also start like handing off simple small tasks to the community, and over time hopefully have more people working for this organization, and then eventually become decentralized. And then obviously also a token can help to align incentives. That's also what we are now doing with our decentralized exchange. So the exchange itself will become a spin-off, and by becoming a spin-off, this exchange, CowSwap, will also create its own token to allow for this bigger decentralization, to have more teams working towards the goal of making it the best exchange. And yes, I think that's the right way to go.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, indeed, I think that's very aligned with what we have been also kind of sharing with a lot of founders, which is the idea of progressive decentralization, right? I think there's some thoughts around, say, DAO first, but what does that mean, right? Realistically speaking, you still need to have a core team that will iterate very quickly, and then perhaps decentralize gradually as well. Let's say like marketing grants, and then later on some sort of like bounties and hackathons, and eventually kind of the core protocol features and the governance itself, like the meta governance. But if I may, I still like to just pick on the iterative approach a little bit, because this is often quite a sticky point with founders, and not just out in crypto but also outside, which is how do you know how long to persist, right? How much to try before you kind of move on to the next one, before you give up. For Gnosis itself, I understand that the original vision of like prediction markets was a core feature, and then that's what the fundraise was for, right? And then there was also emphasis on using it in the governance as well in Futarchy. And then later on, there were quite a few products, just mentioning some names, right? Like the xDAO or like the OWL kind of like stable token and like Dutch X kind of thing. So over time, there must have been some sort of decision that was made to either spend less time or kind of like shut down or consolidate some of these efforts, right? So how do you then strike that balance between persisting versus iterating?
Yeah, very good question. So I mentioned this before, like at the beginning or for a very long time, Gnosis was very top down in terms of decision making. And I think it was at the beginning also the right approach, simply because we had to hire a lot of new people which were coming from other industries that were not really yet familiar with Web3. And obviously, as you mentioned, Gnosis, the ICO, was specifically done to raise capital to create prediction market platforms. And we try to be very careful also about regulation. And so we applied for a license to operate prediction markets regulated in Gibraltar. And it turned out that this was a process that took forever. So we actually never got the license in the end. And at some point we just had to decide to stop working on this regulated approach. It was taking way too much time. It also builds up frustration within the team. If you're building technology that you can never really use in production, it feels kind of useless. And you have to be very mindful of also obviously motivation of your employees and everyone working on those projects. And then obviously time is also an opportunity cost. I think in the bear market we didn't feel it really like that much, because it was a bear market where attention was very limited. Right now, like since we are in a bull market, it's way more competitive. You have to be very, very mindful about your time. In the bear market, it feels like you have more time to just try things out, and if it doesn't work out, it's not so bad. But I would also say in hindsight, we should have stopped some of the projects earlier, where I think it makes sense to set yourself like some sort of deadlines where certain things have to be met. Otherwise, you just call it a day. And if you don't set those, then you can just always continue doing those. And I think in terms of working on regulated prediction markets, that's something we could have stopped earlier. We didn't give up with prediction markets by also stopping working on regulated prediction markets. We actually just shifted our focus more towards fully decentralized prediction markets, which, like at the time when Gnosis started, the technology was not ready yet to actually offer fully decentralized prediction markets. Or if you would do this, then with huge compromises like Orga did. But then, about maybe 2 years ago, when we started to work on fully decentralized prediction markets, technology was ready to allow a good user experience while still being decentralized. And that's when we started working on Omen, like the fully decentralized prediction market. Unfortunately, if you look back on prediction markets today, then you have to realize that no matter if you do it regulated, unregulated, or however you want to approach prediction markets, none of them was really a big success. And this is true not only for Gnosis, but Orga, even like the most popular prediction market today, I think is Poly market, is struggling to get meaningful adoption. And so I think it's fair to say that prediction market as a whole were probably overhyped, and the hype was not really justified. And I think there are many reasons for this. One is if you think like what kind of motivates you to participate in prediction market, then I think there are two reasons. One is pure entertainment or speculation, like for example betting on sports games or like. And I think for this we have already I feel like this market's already satisfied. We have a lot of speculation going on crypto anyways, and the potential upside in many of those investments is much higher than they could possibly be in the prediction market. And so it did not get the attention, like those markets did not get the attention and volumes that people were hoping for. And the other markets I think are like people where some people feel like they have insider knowledge. So and those markets actually, they work quite well, but there are not that many that work well. And we bootstrapped one of those, which was getting quite some attention. And this was about the ETH2 launch date. So there was a public date, I think, announced by the Ethereum Foundation when the launch should happen. And we created and funded a prediction market where you could bet on if this deadline would be met or not. And and surprisingly, this market contradicted the public belief that this would be released on time. And then this sparked some discussions on why is this delayed? Like, why do we still publish this date if it's not possible, and why it's not possible? Is this underfunded, and so on? And it was pretty cool to see this discussion, which was definitely triggered also by this market. And in the end, I think even Ethereum 2 core developers started participating on those prediction markets, which you obviously want because they are the insiders, right? They should know when you can, when ETH2 will be released. And and ultimately it was on time. But it just showed like how you can utilize those markets to spark some interesting discussions and surface information which otherwise would be hidden. And so I think those markets work, but there's just not that many interesting topics within the Ethereum ecosystem where those markets get this attention. So I think, for example, this ETH2 market, which obviously is a very, very important topic for the entire Ethereum ecosystem. This got a decent volume, but if you compare the volume to any other decentralized exchange on Ethereum, then it's still negligible. And just from a pure business standpoint, it's nothing super interesting. And that's why we at Gnosis actually finally decided to pause this for now. That doesn't mean that we don't want to pursue prediction markets at all anymore. Actually, we also still want to support teams that work on prediction markets, and I still think there's a potential to also get entertainment markets more popular. We also have to think of like most of the prediction markets, they started in a bear market. Again, like in the bear market, you generally have a lot less attention. It's much more difficult to build anything because you don't get this feedback from users as much as you would like to have. So I would say there's still a possibility for teams to succeed with prediction markets, but our focus has clearly shifted towards those products that actually got product market fit and the attention that allowed us to successfully develop them. And those are two. One is CowSwap and the other is Gnosis Safe.
All right. Yes. So let's get right into that, right? So Gnosis Safe and CowSwap, as you mentioned, have had incredible adoption in the recent years or so, right? I think Gnosis Safe probably has more than 140 billion worth of assets that is locked in those multi-signature contracts. And CowSwap has seen more than 4.6 billion in volume. And so like for originally not working on these to now having two incredibly successful products, like how did that actually happen? How do you make this transition, and how does that change the vision or positioning of Gnosis DAO?
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting how this actually started. So for the Gnosis Safe previously the Gnosis Multisig started because we ourselves had the need to have a more secure wallet solution. So at the time when the Gnosis ICO happened, there was already one multi-signature wallet available, written, I think, by Gavin when he was still part of the Ethereum Foundation. And when this wallet was written, ERC20 tokens didn't even exist yet. So it was so early that it was really only used for holding Ether. And obviously, when we sold GNO tokens, we actually raised Ether, but we also had significant amount of GNO tokens. So we needed a wallet which was able to secure ERC20 tokens. And that's why I started writing a new contract, which would exactly allow to do this. And maybe was also a bit simpler to read. So it was easy for every developer to read through this contract and understand what's going on, and to trust that this contract does what they actually expect. And and so we did it for our own ICO. And then I think I saw that Golem was the next project that actually had the same needs, because they did an ICO. They raised, I think, even something like 400 or 500,000 Ether. And all of this went straight into this Multisig wallet. And so organically, this wallet built up trust within the community, and then was used by all the other ICOs to come. And this was a success, which was much bigger than with the product that we actually raised the money for. So no one cared really about the prediction markets, but everyone was using the wallet, and that's why we decided to also continue developing it. Again, like we needed ourselves anyways. It's maybe also a good lesson learned that it's always great to have a customer, even better if you're your own customer. That it makes it especially easy to develop the product. And this was definitely the case for the Multisig wallet. We had this ICO successfully done and started hiring, and then we also started specifically hiring for people for working on the specific product, and also safe. And first we tried to actually focus more on a different user group. Like with the Multisig, it was very clear the user group was only teams and funds and organizations. At the beginning, actually, for the Gnosis Safe, we tried to focus more on the individual user, because we knew like the Gnosis Multisig already covered like the other user group. But it turned out, I think also partially because of the bear market, and people mostly using MetaMask still even today, it was difficult to get meaningful adoption for the solution built for the individual user. And so in the end, we pivoted back to the original use case of organizations. And this also took a while. Like it took a while for us to offer a better solution than our first product and make people move, because there are very few products where people have to have more trust into than Multisigs. And so we had this trust in the old Multisig, but it took a while until users felt that the Gnosis Safe had the same reliability and trustworthiness as the old product. And I think it took like 1 or 2 years even until the Safe surpassed the old Multisig in total value locked. And I think then we were very fortunate, obviously, to be ready when the bull market started and everything exploded. And obviously, like Multisigs are not only important to secure like large amount of funds, but they're also super important to control all kind of admin functionality in any kind of DeFi protocols. And the amount of safes created and used and TVL, everything skyrocketed. And fortunately with this, also the developer community around it. So many people and projects started extending the safe. And we also tried to build the safe into a platform which would allow others to participate in it. So we created like this layer of safe apps, which allowed third-party developers to build their dApps right into the Gnosis Safe experience, which is a just much better user experience for those operating Gnosis Safes. And then also on the smart contract level, we allowed extensibility of the safe. which ultimately led to interesting new developments. The most, like, one of the exciting or recent ones was Zodiac itself, or like modules which were created within Zodiac, which allow to extend the Gnosis safe for governance. We mentioned this before. You mentioned this before. This progressive decentralization, which should be done for projects. And if you look at how organizations are created today, then many of them just start with a simple multisig, where like a few founders get together, and to make sure that not a single user has all the power over the organization, you start with a multisig to store funds and maybe upgradability of the system. And obviously, it's quite limited in terms of how decentralized the multisig can be.
That's great. Yeah, I love to just kind of like position it a little bit, right? Because what I hear from you basically, I think you've been saying, or people in the DAO have been saying this, that Gnosis Safe and the suite of products around it have become the minimum viable DAO suite, right? That you need, right? First, you just need to form capital. And then because the way that it is built, where it's extensible or upgradable, where other people can actually contribute to it. And you can use Zodiac to continuously upgrade your own way of running your DAO. It becomes this, the product itself becomes more open to decentralization, because other people can create parts of it and you can continue to change how you use it, right? So like the whole concept of growing and decentralizing is part of the product and part of the organization as well.
Yes, agree. Yeah, I think that's exactly how we see it too. Like you start with a safe as your minimal viable DAO, and as soon as you see you kind of have this product market fit and you want to continuously decentralize, and you can let your token holders take over certain governance functions, and eventually fully withdraw all the like original signers of this multisig, and then you have de facto token holder governance. So yeah.
Yeah, I love to just explore how this was done within the Gnosis DAO, right? Because like you mentioned, at some point you kind of like feel that, okay, there's sufficient product market fit. The way the product is built also allows for third-party developers to kind of build on top of it or build for it as well. And then at some point you decide that, okay, actually, let's kind of create a separate team, or maybe think about spinning off and having its own brand and identity. So how do you do this as part of DAO? It feels like a natural kind of progression that, is sub DAO kind of forms and it spins off on its own. How was that journey for you, and what are some lessons you'd like to share?
Right. Yeah. So here, actually, kind of again, we had this case of we are this organization that wants to turn into a DAO, but we don't really have the right tools yet. So we started implementing some of them ourselves. So obviously, there were already previously governance frameworks. We actually worked a lot together with DAO Stack in the past, and we also took a look at compound governance, Aave governance, and so on. But we realized that for our use case, none of them were like perfect. And at the same time, coming from Gnosis Safe, we saw the possibility to extend the safe for governance purposes. And so we were thinking of how can we make DAO participation as inclusive as possible, while not compromising on security of the DAO itself. Because in the DAO you always have this issue of or like this tension between you want to be agile, you want to be fast. At the same time, you don't want to open the attack surface for very few members to compromise the system. And so with Zodiac, we started working on a module which is called it's now called Reality. And the way it works is that it allows you to make off-chain votes on-chain executable. And off-chain votes, I think, are very important. Or like we saw that there is a huge success of off-chain votes with Snapshot, right? Like most DAOs right now, they use Snapshot because they, everyone can vote. It doesn't cost you any gas. And that's why I think it was so popular and inclusive and got a lot of participation. which I think is important to make the DAO resilient. So we didn't want to compromise on this. At the same time, we also wanted to find a way how we can make the results of those votes on-chain executable. So that's something that Compound, for example, allows you to do. But in Compound, you have to vote on-chain. And so every proposal just costs a lot of gas. And yeah, with Zodiac, we built this first module, which effectively allowed you to use any sort of off-chain consensus to make it on-chain, to make transactions on-chain executable. And it's using, so in simple words, how it works is, let's say there is a snapshot poll, and the poll agrees that we send 10 ether, that we send 10 ether to another address, for example. Then you can take this transaction and you can go to the Zodiac module and say, yeah, I want to execute this, and you have to put up a bond. And then it's time locked for a certain period of time. And in this time frame, anyone can challenge your proposal by doubling your bond. And so then again, like, the time of execution is delayed, and so everyone else can then again challenge the challenger, and double the bond. And so it's a very effective way of on the one hand allowing to have a fast and cheap way of executing on-chain transactions, while making sure it's very difficult to compromise the system and very expensive.
So did you use these products when now that CowSwap is actually spinning off as an independent product and independent DAO in itself, right? So did you use all of these and go through these steps, and including Zodiac? How was that experience?
Yeah, not yet. So CowSwap and Gnosis Safe are still at the very beginning. So the CowSwap DAO doesn't even exist yet, but I expect the team to be using Gnosis Safe and Zodiac. We had this experience, however, with Gnosis DAO. So Gnosis DAO, we first decided we want to launch Gnosis DAO. We want to make much more transparent what Gnosis does. And we start with a Gnosis Safe. So we created a Gnosis Safe with a nice address, which includes the word DAO at the beginning. And then later on worked on Zodiac to make sure that this safe can eventually be upgraded to something that is more decentralized and that is actually controlled by token holders. And this is this was a proposal to Gnosis DAO, one of the first to enable. At that point, it was still called SafeSnap or Gnosis DAO, and allow token holders to take control over this DAO. And I expect the same will happen also with CowSwap and Gnosis Safe, of course.
Nice. So we're literally talking about the cutting edge here, right? Because reality is just kind of like being built, and you are about to be the first user as we speak,
right?
About this. So I want to just zoom in on one particular kind of incident or journey that the DAO had to go through, right, as a collective entity, which is, of course, the Gnosis chain merger. Now called Gnosis Chain. And I understand that must have been quite an exercise for the DAO itself, right? Because it required not just the coordination of Gnosis DAO itself, but also with the xDAI community, right? And then deciding on what are the terms, how the process will be done, negotiating the different numbers, and then eventually executing it on chain. And I even saw today that one of the DAOs said like, oh shit, we didn't swap it in time, and we can't get an airdrop, so now we have to go back and do we do something about that, right? So it seems to be there are a lot of moving parts and different people that you have to align, right? So would you like to share some experiences of how that was done, and what learnings you would like to share with other DAOs on mergers or coordinating your own DAO and working with other DAOs?
Right, yeah. So the idea of merging with xDAI, I think, came up maybe 6 to 8 months ago. So it's really a while back, where this was mostly idea that was discussed at the beginning between the core xDAI team and the core Gnosis team. And at least for Gnosis, it was very obvious that we have Gnosis DAO, and this is a proposal that can only be executed over Gnosis DAO, obviously. The way this merger effectively worked was that Gnosis DAO took some of its GNO supply and allowed stake token holders, so stake is the token of the xDAI network, to convert those tokens to GNO tokens. And that's already like just on the on the rough terms, actually already the biggest part of the deal. So it's very transparent. There's no closed door deals in this. It's really a very transparent offer that was initially, of course, proposed or like negotiated between the core teams of Gnosis and xDAI. But it was clear that in order to make this proceed, we have to get the backing of both communities. So in case of Gnosis, it's clear, we have Gnosis DAO, it has to go through a vote anyways. In terms of the xDAI community, xDAI actually doesn't have a DAO, but they have a very strong community. And so it was very clear that, we have to make sure that the community is aligned. And so we wrote down this proposal, we made it public on the Gnosis forum and shared it widely within the xDAI community. And then also had a community call with the xDAI community, and it was pretty clear that seemingly many were not very happy about this proposal. And since the main part of this was this conversion between stake and GNO, most people were concerned about the price, and they were like, in their opinion, stake token was so undervalued that this should not be done, and that stake would be better off without Gnosis. And of course, then we had this community call, and we tried to explain what the benefits are of merging those teams, merging the assets, having a much bigger leverage, and making xDAI successful. And I think this already helped quite a bit to get more xDAI members aligned. But ultimately, we also changed the offer a little bit. So we had another iteration on it. And I think then most of the stake token holders were also happy. And then we proceeded according to the rules of the Gnosis forum, with first a forum poll and then a snapshot poll. And I think there were only 2 or 3 GNO token holders voting against this proposal on the Gnosis side. On the stake token side, it was also a pretty positive outcome. I think 95% in the end voted in favor of this proposal. And and then we actually used the Gnosis DAO and the reality module that we mentioned, previously called SafeSnap, to submit this proposal of withdrawing the GNO tokens from the vesting contract, filling the swap contracts to allow stake token holders to swap. And we actually also integrate in this proposal a buyback options for GNO for Ether. So this kind of allowed, in this case, stake token holders to have a guaranteed stake Ether ratio as well. And and everything worked as expected, fortunately, just from a technical perspective. But also, we were, of course, very happy to see both communities finally being happy with this proposal. And and I think it was the right decision. Now, xDAI has a much bigger leverage in negotiations and a much better perspective, a long-term perspective. And I think for Gnosis, also, it's great to have this, this new playing field, this new platform that we can leverage now for all the applications that we built over the last couple of years. And obviously, both teams are very well connected in the ecosystem. And now it's a very different challenge compared to what we did in the past. But it's also fun, and we can see already some success in starting new incentive programs, getting new applications up running, investing into new applications, which will also then potentially launch on Gnosis chain. There was also one big change coming to xDAI with this merger, which was a change of the technology stack that xDAI is using, and also the narratives that comes with it. So with the merger, we also decided to exchange the proof of stake algorithm and to follow closely the Ethereum 2 roadmap. So we launched our own beacon chain. So there is the Gnosis beacon chain up running, and you can actually stake your GNO to participate in validation. And so we kind of replicated what Ethereum wants to do, but with the benefit that we are a smaller network and we can be faster in applying changes, simply because we can take a little bit more risk. And so the narrative that we are shaping, or like also how we see Gnosis chain, is sort of like what Kusama is maybe to Polkadot, like a network which is kind of accelerated Polkadot. It can implement changes faster. It's a Canary network that allows for more testing, for faster roadmaps. And this is exactly what we like to be also for Ethereum. So we like to help Ethereum succeed. We like to work closely together with ETH2 core development to see how we can help, like what kind of things we can test to make also sure that the biggest event for Ethereum this year, which is the merger, obviously, will succeed. In order to help, we want to make sure that this merger will happen first on Gnosis chain, to have this peace of mind that this change will also be very successful for Ethereum mainnet.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that you mentioned that it's the parallel to Kusama and Polkadot. And it sounds almost as if like any changes that Ethereum plans to implement, you will first do it on Gnosis chain. So you'll actively replicate the exact upgrades, and not just from the merge, but later on there's so many phases of ETH2 that are coming, right? Like the whole like surge and verge and so on. And so all of this will be done first on the Gnosis chain. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a goal.
Wow.
Like we always want to kind of say like an Ethereum front runner, where we can be faster in implementing. That's what we are working on. We also have been working on Ethereum core development for a while within Gnosis when we took over Open Ethereum, which is now maintained by the previous xDAI, now Gnosis chain team. And and also have been supporting the Aragon team. So the Aragon team, not to be confused with the Aragon team. So the Aragon team is working on like a high performance Ethereum 1 client. And one promise that we would like to make with Gnosis chain is that gas cost should not exceed 1 cent per 100,000 gas. And if you look at Binance Smart Chain today, then this promise could not be held anymore. And I think even for Polygon, that's not the case anymore. So it is a promise which is ambitious, but we hope by bringing together those technology players like Aragon and others, that we are able to keep this promise.
Wow. Yeah. I can see now that this move is not just kind of, to acquire just another infrastructure piece, right? To empower your ecosystem, but actually it's couched in a larger vision of supporting the growth of Ethereum, making sure that it's secure, and also working together with all the other core developers and infrastructure pieces to help everybody kind of like progress faster, right? And keep the cost low as well for this testing ground. So I can see that this mission, I'm sure, actually energizes and unites more people and more developers around the Gnosis ecosystem. If I may also just kind of like recap a few things that Gnosis did during that process of merging with xDAI to become Gnosis chain. You mentioned about like firstly stating the kind of like win-wins, right? What's in it for xDAI and what's in it for Gnosis, and then communicating it that very clearly, and that helped to ease a lot of the tension. And then after that, being also open to feedback and iterating based on the whatever price point that they felt was more reasonable. And then, of course, executing it with tech that you already have or that you have an advantage in. Of course, the very interesting part there was the Gnosis buyback that was done to maintain a certain ratio with ETH to make sure that the price was pegged. And that is indeed something also that I would argue very few DAOs can do, and argue that Gnosis is one of the very few DAOs that is in the position to do that, because it has such a huge treasury, which I love to get into. Right? I think most DAOs today hold a lot of native tokens, right? Most of it's native tokens. They give out grants and so on in the native tokens, but Gnosis being around for so long actually has a huge war chest of ETH, right? Originally it was 150,000 ETH about November 2020 or so, and then since then has even grown to 180,000 as a result of yield farming. And I'm sure a lot of other DAOs or organizations would like crave to learn how was that done, how is it managed, right? I understand it's kind of like done in partnership, a lot of yield farming. So how did Gnosis approach treasury management, and how would you advise or share your experience with other DAOs and how to do so?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, we obviously all the funds that we raised was through our ICO at the very beginning, and yeah, we always did quite actively treasury management. So we were, I would say, fortunate timing in trading. So we sold quite a bit of Ether at the top of the first bull market, 2018, like late 2017, beginning 2018, and this allowed us to keep growing also through a bear market and build everything we wanted. We were never capital constrained, and and then obviously DeFi summer happened, and we saw a huge opportunity, and we participated, I would say, since the early days, like even Compound, we already started doing some yield farming, but yeah, I think it got much more intense when like things like SushiSwap happened, and we started also participating in those yield farms simply because we otherwise saw a huge opportunity cost that we didn't want to have. Like, we had this capital, why not use it? And we started also building up an internal team for it. So we had people dedicated very quickly that were only focused on yield farming, finding new opportunities. Obviously, we were quite well connected in the space. So we also exchanged with other teams that were participating in yield farming of what kind of opportunities there are. And we had also the advantage of very few teams that we, like, contrary to many hedge funds, we actually have also a technical team. And so we can evaluate risks on not only on an economical level, but also on a smart contract level. And yeah, this definitely gave us an edge, which we used for our benefit. And ultimately, like all the funds that we raised, obviously we saw them as being owned by Gnosis token holders. So the capital that we raised, it's not our capital; it's the capital that should belong to the GNO token holders, and that's why it was always our goal to make this very clear, also by moving those funds into Gnosis DAO. And this is something that we promised, I think, in November 2020. And it took a while until we could finally follow this promise, simply because it is turned out to be way more complex than we thought it is to do this transfer. But finally, we were able to transfer the assets, and now the treasury is managed by Gnosis DAO, and it's probably the most diversified treasury that any DAO has. And if you exclude like the project tokens, then I think it's also the largest at this point of all DAOs. And and of course, now Gnosis DAO has those funds, and also Gnosis DAO should not let those funds being idling, but instead use those funds. And that's why the team that has formed within Gnosis to do yield farming kind of became independent of Gnosis, created their own structure, their own team, and then made a proposal to Gnosis DAO to do the yield farming on their behalf. And that's what's happening now. So now Gnosis has very significant income just from passive income from those yield farming activities. And I'm quite excited to see what ideas the community has to use those earnings. Like could be buybacks, could be investment into new teams. We will see.
Indeed. Wow, like there's such a story, right, where it was kind of incubated in-house and then now spinning off. So I think that must be a Karpathy DAO, right? The team that was formed.
Correct. Yes.
And they are rightly earning their revenue because they are, of course, proposing the strategies and keeping monitoring on that, and then just taking a cut of whatever that's on top. And I think that has allowed Gnosis to, like you mentioned, use it in prudent ways as well to invest in either products that are spinning off or other strategic projects that you like to support, right? I think a while ago there was a Gnosis ecosystem kind of a fund that was announced. And of course, recently, a couple of these projects, such as a Carbon Key, also received investment from the Gnosis DAO. So it seems almost like the end game for DAOs is to do that, right? Like gather people along a mission, right? Form capital, form people, and then as and when you can spin off, you would also support them by letting the people form their own entities and support them financially. So how would you kind of advise DAOs about investing or doing kind of like token swaps even with other DAOs and sub DAOs, right? How do you approach or think about this?
Yeah, I think right now, if you look at like how are most DAOs currently, like what kind of assets do they have, then for most DAOs, they have over 90% of their treasury in their own token. And while I think it's a good idea to believe in yourself, it's also a good idea to diversify a little bit, and not only to mitigate financial risks, but also for incentive alignments. So for Gnosis DAO, for me, it seems very obvious that Gnosis DAO will have to do many token swaps with many projects to give them also an incentive to run on Gnosis chain. So that's a very obvious one. We actually also did this in the past already through like when we still had assets in the regular companies. But yeah, I think it's not only about financial risk, but obviously about partnerships and building like strategic lines with other teams. And there are also very interesting economical possibilities of how to make these partnerships even stronger. So what we have been doing in the past as well is not only doing a token swap, but also using those tokens and to provide liquidity on a decentralized exchange like Uniswap. So you swap those tokens, but effectively you bind the success of this investment also to the economic success of the other team. And yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I would definitely recommend pretty much every other DAO to start thinking about token swaps, and of course be mindful about what are the most important partners, and also if you actually think that they are a good investment, that the valuations make any sense. But if that's the case, then yes. And I think for Gnosis DAO specifically, we will also do this. We already have a list of teams where we think it makes sense to approach them and see if we can arrange a token swap. And so I would hope that Gnosis DAO can make really large token swaps with some other teams very soon. By doing so, making sure that those teams have a bigger interest in Gnosis succeeding, especially Gnosis chain, and also obviously also vice versa.
So speaking of aligning interests, allow me to go on a slight tangent here to kind of like very sneakily bring back a theme, which is Futarchy, because it's always been a kind of like, how do you have financial interest in like the positive outcome of either a partnership or like a decision made in governance, and it very much aligns with prediction markets. So I have to ask you about it, given you're one of the experts on the field, right? I understand Gnosis actually has tried it before with Gnosis Impacts, right? To actually predict the outcome on the price of Gnosis, a GNO, for certain decisions. How has that played out for you in terms of like activating governance engagement as well as surfacing the truth? Would you recommend people consider this approach?
Yeah, no. So to be short, like it did not really foster any engagement. It was almost like we created huge also arbitrage opportunities that no one ever exploited. So basically had a lot of money laying on the street, but no one was willing to pick it up. And I think the reason was that people just did not really understand the concept, or were too busy with other things to care about it. So maybe to roughly explain how this generally works is quite interesting conceptually. So obviously in the prediction market, what you do is you are predicting the outcome of future events. And it's a market, so the outcomes are effectively assets which have a market price between 0 and 1, and you can trade them. And if the price is close to 1, then effectively it means like it relates to the probability of the event and being close to 100%, because you can redeem it for the underlying asset. And Futarchy is kind of applying prediction markets to governance, which is obviously super interesting in the context of DAOs. And like one canonical example that people like to give is the fire the CEO Futarchy market, where you are predicting the stock price of a company under the condition that you keep the CEO or that you fire the CEO. And then you can, let's say, the stock price at the end of this year, and then you can keep those markets running for a month or so. And if after 1 month the market predicts that the stock price at the end of the year will be much higher if you fire the CEO, then we decide to fire the CEO. And I think Martin was thinking of doing this example for Gnosis, but finally I think we haven't implemented this example. But it's super interesting. But in reality, it's sort of difficult for users to price outcomes. Just the mental load that people have to put into understanding the market, the consequences, and what kind of price difference is justified is something that it's just the user experience is just not good enough. Like, it just takes too much mental load for users to understand what is going on and what the consequences are, that they just won't participate. And I think we already have like the issue in governance generally, that there's this voter apathy where people just don't really want to even just sign a message to vote, even without gas costs. And if then you ask people to understand the concept of Futarchy, understand, like, make up their mind about what kind of price should be justified, they will just probably not do it. And that was the sad reality so far with Futarchy. Even though conceptually it's super interesting, in reality it hasn't really taken off yet. Maybe I don't know, maybe there are still experiments that we could do. But again, like, I think it's so far it has not been very successful.
Right, that's quite unfortunate. And like you said, it is a bigger problem, right? The whole idea of voter apathy and how do you get people to understand the implications of even a proposal and then vote what they think is the best decision. So Futarchy, I think idealistically, it's meant to incentivize you to then go through that study and then align your skin in the game with that decision, right? So without that incentive, then how else do you engage your DAO and make sure that people actually get informed and then vote on these decisions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I have to say we also haven't solved it. What I can see, what works quite well, delegation of voting power. Like, it's nothing new. Obviously, this existed before DAOs existed. But I think we see more and more what we could call like protocol politicians, like reputable members of our community that dedicate more of their time towards one protocol to understand what kind of decisions have to be made and have an informed opinion on what should be done. And then token holders can delegate their vote to those protocol politicians, which then can vote on their behalf. That's one thing. Of course, it's also great to get token holders directly involved, but I think it's just a matter of like how much attention you have and how many proposals there are. So even today, for me, it's very difficult to keep up with all the different projects and what kind of proposals they are voting on. So for me, I would also feel better by just trusting someone who I know who will execute on my behalf in a way that I would also like to see things executed, than being involved myself in every single vote.
Do you think delegates should be incentivized, or are they being incentivized in some way, aside from the intrinsic kind of like wish that the DAO succeeds, and of course their own ownership in the tokens itself?
Yeah, no, they definitely should be. I think it should not be underestimated how much work it is to actually be actively involved in governance. And of course, it should be something where the incentive they get is clearly aligned with the success of the project. And yeah, ideally, it could be simply like vested tokens over a certain period of time, or like having certain KPIs that are also relevant for everyone else working on this. But they should definitely be incentivized. And I think it should also be a competitive incentive. I think you, as a project, you want to have the smartest people working for you. So those people also have very limited time. So you have to make competitive offers.
Right. So you would encourage all DAOs to consider setting aside some budget or some tokens in order to kind of pay essentially the protocol politicians to represent all the token holders, evaluate, and make the right decisions.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, so that's an incredible trend. We talked about like the governance activation through delegation. We talked about token swaps aligning interests. We talked about progressive decentralization using many of these tools, and these are definitely some of the most major trends that DAOs are going through today, right? Like everybody goes through these steps. So, what other trends or observations would you like to highlight in the DAO space today?
Yeah, I think what we saw, like especially last year, was this these ownership DAOs. Something that I also did not really anticipate, which I think was also strongly connected with the explosion of NFTs. That suddenly, within very short time, groups formed like Pleaser DAO or People DAO, with the goal of purchasing something. And I think it was actually amazing, not only because like they, for example, Pizza DAO did some charity work, but also because it really brought this concept of DAOs more into the public space. Like suddenly people started discussing DAOs that never heard even of DAOs before, and I think that was great. But I think now, hopefully, we'll see that DAOs will also have like a larger impact beyond just like shared ownership. I hope that again, like at the beginning, we discussed of like what does DAO actually stand for, like, or how would you define a DAO? And in my view, again, like I think DAOs are great because they, on an abstract level, they just are a framework of how to organize and how to organize and align in an organization. And I hope that we can more bridge the gap towards like actually existing organizations and apply what DAOs can do for us already in other use cases. I think one thing that is interesting to see is how DAOs can allow also to be more involved into like regular politics, not only protocol politicians, but actually bridging the gap to real world politics and to align organizations on a global scale. I think today what we see is we have lots of issues, or humanity is facing a lot of issues, which can only be solved on a global scale. But we are still like set in a mindset that is more on a like state level or like country level. And I hope that maybe also through DAOs, who knows, we'll be able to align incentives better also on a more global scale, and eventually can have some impact, at least on solving some of the bigger, larger problems. I'm not sure if 2022 is the year where this happens, but I can see that there's at least I see that some some politicians are evaluating like how Web3 could be utilized better for making those things happen. I saw that, for example, in Catalonia in Spain, the party that tries to separate from Spain is actually evaluating how to use Web3. And we saw like experiments with something like KlimaDAO. So that's what I'm really excited for. And I hope we will see more of those experiments soon.
Absolutely. Like I said, not just focusing on a particular product or a use case or to own a particular art piece or NFT, right? But rather to coordinate people, perhaps even on a global scale. What a great way to end this episode. Right before we wrap up, is there anything you'd just like to quickly shout out? Any call to action regarding Gnosis or appreciation to any other DAOs or things you think require more attention?
I think generally, like if you are new to DAOs, you should just try to jump into one of those DAOs and see how they operate. And right now, there's a lot going on at Gnosis for sure, more than ever before. And we're also growing. So in case you want to get involved, you can visit our forum and our Discord. It's like forum.gnosis.io. There's also the link to the Discord. And we are happy to welcome any new members. It's kind of like we're kind of in a situation right now where we have these big spin-offs from Gnosis Safe and CowSwap. And with those, like majority of people are also effectively leaving, becoming their own. And so Gnosis Core is again fairly small. And that also implies that it has to grow again. And so, we are happy for new members and we'll welcome you with open arms.
Indeed. What a great place to start as well for anyone who's interested in DAOs. All right. Thank you so much again, Stefan, for joining us today and for this incredibly insightful conversation about DAOs.
Thanks a lot, Khai, for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day. And for everyone else, see you next time.